1913 is a large Pueblo I village located in southeast Utah. It consists of over 160 rooms arranged in 4 arcing room blocks, which connect on the western side and have a plaza and a pit structure in the center of them. The site was first excavated by Joe Brew back in the 1930s, and re-excavations of the site have occurred in 2012 and 2013, led by James Allison at Brigham Young University. The crew consisted of graduate students and a series of local volunteers. The site is most important and probably most famously known because it's one of the earliest found large village P1 sites. Well, one of the other important things about it, though, is that it represents an important and crucial transition in social and political development in the early Pueblo sequence. This transition from these early basket-maker 3 dispersed hamlets of maybe a few pit houses where familial groups lived, to a large area, again, of over 100 rooms where people couldn't possibly have all been related. Now, Joe Brew, who originally excavated the site, identified 5 different architectural styles there. He attributed these to being temporal styles and differentiation of the site. However, according to the tree ring dates, the site was only occupied for 20, maybe 30 years. So it seems fairly unlikely that in that short span of time, 5 different styles came in and out of vogue. Allison, however, has suggested that maybe these, instead of representing temporal differentiation, represent people of diverse backgrounds, people with different ideas on how a structure could be constructed. And as these people are coming together, they're figuring out for one of the first times in this early period how to create a community. Now, as I said, the site was only occupied for about 20 or 30 years, and the reason why the occupation is so short was because at the end of this time period, the whole structure burned. And as you probably know, there is a precedence for ritual burnings and closings and abandonments of structures in the Southwest. However, Joe Brew discovered over 170 whole vessels still on the floor of these structures, as well as a myriad of other in-situ artifacts. This seems very unlikely if people knew that they were going to be leaving the site, that they would be leaving these things on the floor. So it seems more likely that this was abandoned and all these artifacts were left in situ. And while I am sure that this catastrophic abandonment was devastating to the people who lived at Site 13, short of finding another Pompeii, this is pretty much every archaeologist's dream, finding an in-situ context like this. However, unfortunately, despite the amazing preservation that we have there, very little is known about botanical remains. Joe Brew published a fairly sizely volume, about 350 pages, which included about a 2.5-page appendix addressing the macrobotanical remains. And in this appendix, it basically says that there was corn, beans, some cactus, and some phragmites. However, there's a little footnote that says, essentially, in retrospect, we think we probably should have kept the gourds that we found at the site. Yeah. As well as we probably should have kept all of the corn. So essentially, what we learned from Brew's report is that they had corn, beans, and squash, which isn't exactly a revelatory understanding in the Southwest. It's fairly common. So one of the questions that I had was, what else was there besides these very common things that are found at all sites? In order to answer this, I decided to go through flotation samples that were taken in the excavations from 2012 and 2013. These were taken from rooms that had not been previously excavated, one storage room and one residential room, as well as a small sample from the largest pit house on the site. Now, after analyzing the materials found in these remains, I discovered that they ate a lot of corn, which again is no big surprise. The majority of all of these samples contained corn. However, there were some other smaller seeds, things like podium, amaranth, some grasses, and a few other things. These things may have been used economically, however, they may also have been brought in on people's clothing or on their shoes and deposited at the site. However, what is a little more interesting, a little surprising to me, was that the results of the materials found in the storage room versus the residential room weren't really any different. They had the same types of materials, and they had about the same numbers of seeds found in both of the rooms, which I didn't expect. However, what was different was that large, oversized pit structure that was located a little farther north. Now, in this pit structure, we sadly only had a very small sample, it's only 1/2 liter, but in that small sample, over 6 different types of seeds were found, which is significant when compared to the residential room, which had 1, 2, or maybe 3 different types of seeds. And this may be, if you put this into context, it may kind of start explaining a little bit of it. James Allison, as well as Catherine Spillman, have suggested that this large structure may have been used as a communal gathering place and for rituals that included feasting, which would make sense if you have a site where people of diverse backgrounds are coming together for the first time and needing to figure out how to form a community. You're going to need somewhere for them to gather, for them to unify. And the variety of seeds that are found in this structure may support that conclusion that feasting did occur there. However, of course, we need some more samples. In addition to this, however, as we all know, macrobotanical remains are only part of the story. Many botanical remains don't survive the harsh conditions that all these archaeological sites, or most of them that we experience and excavate, are exposed to. So one of the other things we wanted to do was to look at the residue, the ceramic residues. Part of this was because it was very interesting to see what they had to say, and part of it was because of a recent study that Dorothy Washburn has published. Washburn and colleagues has done an analysis of 10 whole vessels from Site 13, as well as a variety of vessels from the surrounding area, using what's called an ultra-precision liquid chromatography mass spectrometer. Yeah, proud of myself. I'm obviously an archaeologist, not a chemist. They found evidence for cacao on 7 out of the 10 vessels from Site 13. Now, obviously, chocolate on vessels in the Southwest is extremely exciting. What's even more interesting and more exciting is that this pushes back the early state of cacao in the region by hundreds of years. However, the following year, they also came out with a report, and this report said that they decided to test as a control artifacts from different areas and from different time periods that should never have had access to chocolate or never been in contact with them. And of course, then unfortunately, they found chocolate on all of them, or at least most of them, which led them to test the shelves. And much to the dismay of many archaeologists and I'm sure museum curators, they also found evidence for chocolate on the shelves of many of the major museums across the United States. Yeah, it's concerning. However, due to statistical analysis and a few other things, Washburn and her colleagues have concluded that these vessels from Site 13 probably are not due to contamination and that they likely do provide good evidence for cacao. Well, fortunately, we were currently excavating at Site 13 when these studies came out, which provided us with a perfect opportunity to do residue analysis on them and determine whether we could provide additional evidence for chocolate at the site. So, we excavated these sherds, put them directly in a bag, put them on a box on a shelf, and tried not to touch them, we didn't wash them, and we tried not to dill them. Last spring, 14 of these sherds were chosen for analysis, and we ran them at the Gang Lab at Washington State University. We used the same machine, the ultra-precision liquid chromatography mass spectrometer, as well as similar methods that Washburn used to extract the materials. And when we analyzed the results, we didn't find any of the markers that are consistent with cacao on any of the sherds. Now, while this doesn't necessarily mean that there is no evidence for chocolate at Site 13, there's just no evidence on our sherds. Our sherds were in the southern portion, and the ones that she used, the bowls that she used were kind of in a more northern area. This may indicate that maybe there was some sort of differential access to chocolate at the site. However, I think more importantly, we need to then reconsider whether or not there is chocolate at the site. There really is good evidence, especially since the vessel that she was using had been sitting on a shelf for over 80 years. However, even though we didn't find evidence for chocolate, we did find evidence for nicotine, which was extremely exciting, especially since there are no pipes at the site. So the question is then, what were they doing with the nicotine? Maybe they were brewing it for, using it for medicinal purposes or maybe other purposes, or maybe there's pipes that we just haven't found. All in all, however, the majority of the evidence that we found from the ceramic residue analysis was a lack of evidence. But even though it was a lack of evidence, it was still extremely important for us being able to understand what is going on at this crucial and very important early village site. And hopefully, and even though these samples are small, we used 13 flotation samples and 14 ceramic samples, we were able to understand some crucial bits of information about Site 13 that weren't available in Brew's original site report, or even in the artifacts that he recovered. And hopefully, those fingers crossed, this project's still in its infancy. And as we go back and collect more and more samples, we will be able to better recreate and better understand the use of botanical materials at this extremely important early P1 village. Thank you.